Hey guys, thank you for stopping by. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And I hope you enjoyed this interview. All right, welcome back. My guest is with me right here at the table, Dr. Christian Ebeke. He is the IMF resident representative here in Nigeria. And we're looking at the Article 4 consultation report that came out just a few days ago. Welcome to you, Dr. Ebeke, and good to see you again.
Thank you, Nancy.
We've met twice actually. You've been in the room. We have anchored shows twice.
Yes.
Yes, so it's good to see you. Now let's get started. I've read your report, 98 pages, and I will like to start by asking you what the IMF means in terms of sequencing of policies for the economy, because Nigerians are really in pain due to the prescriptions of this administration. And a lot of people have said, IMF should just take out their mouth from Nigeria, in terms of we're not happy with you guys, your prescriptions and all of that. So I would like you to comment on that.
Thank you, Nancy, and thank you for having me. I think you started off the interview with a key word, which is actually throughout our report that we issued last Thursday, is the sequencing of reform. So let's start with the initial point. This administration inherited significant imbalances in the economy. Inflation was already trending upward. The administration inherited a very low tax to GDP ratio. Last year it was 9% of GDP, one of the lowest in the world. There were already pressures on the foreign exchange market with multiple windows and reserves that were very small compared to what actually this country needs. So a lot of imbalances were inherited by the administration, and then they took some bold and challenging reforms, the subsidy reform, but also the unification of exchange rates. So what you have to take into account is the fact that while you're doing these reforms, they could have distributional consequences. And we see right now that there is a lot of pain for Nigerians at the current juncture. That's why the sequencing of this reform is so key. And one of the key messages that we advocate in the report is that you have to start delivering or accelerating the payment to vulnerable households. There is a scheme right now that is sponsored by the Finance Ministry together with the World Bank. This scheme is targeting 15 million households, approximately 65 million Nigerians. You have to make sure that you are delivering on this social protection. Before then, you can think about phasing out, for example, the costly fuel subsidies and doing the additional reform that you need to maintain fiscal space and protect the sustainability. So the sequencing that you mentioned is exactly that. You start by delivering on social protection so that you can unleash additional reforms while protecting the most vulnerable in the country.
My next question to you from what you've just said will be now, how do we recalibrate the trade-offs? Because there are definitely trade-offs of this policy adjustments that are causing pain on the Nigerian people. So how do we recalibrate the trade-offs? Because something must give.
I think in policy making, you always navigate difficult trade-offs. And again, as this administration came into power, as I mentioned, they inherited significant imbalances. And addressing these imbalances first will take time. Addressing these imbalances will have distributional consequences on some part of the population. And making sure that you can sustain the reform momentum requires that you must also bring a social agenda that is equally strong. That's why we again insist on making sure that the trade-off can be managed while you're putting in place a very strong and efficient social safety net in the country to make sure that people who cannot be seizing the opportunities that the reform brings in the near term can at least get support from the federal government. But how do you get that? How do you finance this, right? The payment to vulnerable households costs money. So that's why we were very pleased to see that the administration is also focused very much on revenue mobilization. You know, the work of the Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform is again a very comprehensive work that aims at, in the short run, increasing revenue mobilization without necessarily increasing the taxes, but actually streamline the multiple taxes, and at the same time providing the fiscal space that you need to address what? More education spending, more health spending, more investment on security and infrastructure. So that's how you address the trade-off. To sustainably finance the social protection that Nigeria wants, you also at the same time need to raise a little bit more revenue, and that will create the type of confidence. People will believe more in your reform if you can prove that what you're doing with the money is the right things that you actually perform.
When you're talking of social transfer, social protection, it shouldn't also be for long. That is it, because the government can't continue to, to give monies, because it also has inflationary impact and all of that. So I want you to address that, but also address this. How do we address the ongoing implicit petrol subsidy that is on right now? Because from your reports, you welcomed the bold moves of this administration. I also saw in the report reform pauses, in terms of, and when I saw reform pauses, I was like, okay, petrol subsidy is one, because you went on with the reform, but you held your brakes there. So how do we address the implicit subsidy? Because I can also understand the government. They don't want to heat up the system, because if they could have, we will be buying petrol for close to 1,000 naira right now. So there is implicit subsidy somewhere.
Again, Nancy, your questions are great. The issue of subsidy, what is the starting point? The starting point is that the prices that Nigerians pay at the pump is currently below what is the supply cost of getting these refined products, right? So when you compare the two, there is a gap. And this gap is what we call in our jargon implicit subsidies. Now, our estimate for this year are that this gap amounts to something closer to 3% of GDP when you also add electricity implicit subsidy there. So we have fuel and electricity subsidy around 3% of GDP for this year, and this is an estimate for the full year. The issue there is that 3% of GDP, Nancy, amounts to 1/3 of what Nigeria, for example, collected last year in terms of total tax to GDP ratio. So these are foregone revenues that the administration, unfortunately, is not going to get in because those implicit subsidies are in the system. So these are foregone revenues. What you need to do, and the report talks clearly about this, the starting point is inflation is high. There is a cost of living, a lot of pain for Nigerians. The economy is still adjusting to the different reforms that have been implemented. Before you phase out these subsidies, our recommendation is clear. Strengthen the social protection system in Nigeria to make sure that once you kind of deliver on the phasing out of subsidy, people who will be hardly affected by the increase in pump prices that you need to do to save more revenues, those people can cope with the reform. So the sequencing, again, is very, very simple. You start by strengthening different ways of helping the most vulnerable out. Before then, you start phasing out gradually the issue of electricity and fuel subsidy.
So as we wind down, because we have about 2 to 3 minutes, and let me ask these questions in succession so that you're able to answer them. You brought me now to the issue of cost of living from your answer, cost of living crisis that has been occasioned by food inflation. So I'd like you to speak on how do we address the cost of living crisis? Labour is on one hand asking for 615,000 naira, and I know from where I'm seated that the government cannot afford that. Secondly, food inflation issues too that are also structural. Food inflation in Nigeria, 40% as at the last count by the MBX exacerbated by insecurity, also a bit of foreign exchange volatility and all of that. So how do we address that? Then in a nutshell, perhaps give me 3, 4, 5, policy recommendations from this report from people that have not seen this report or do not have access. Can't go online and read it because it's a whole lot.
Okay. A lot to unpack here. Let me be brief. The cost of living faced by Nigerians is the most immediate policy challenges this administration faces. Food and security is the most immediate priority, in our view, to be addressed. On the one hand, you have demand-side policies that are being put in place. The central bank is tightening financial conditions in order to rein in inflation. So by reducing overall inflation, this will also help addressing the issue of the cost of living. By doing that, by tightening monetary policy, but also coordinating the response with the fiscal authorities, right? Remember, Nancy, that one practice here in Nigeria over the years was that the central bank was financing directly the fiscal deficit. We call it here ways and means. This led to a massive increase in money supply. That money supply, when supply side in the real economy is rigid, that money supply led to also accelerating inflation. So the fact that the central bank is tightening monetary policy, the fact that they're coordinating now with the finance ministry on making sure that this practice of ways and means is terminated, this is all positive and will contribute to a stable inflation, but also a stable Naira gradually. The issue now of a few key recommendations from the report, again, we have to look at the sequencing and the coordination of policies. First is the issue of addressing food insecurity. That's why we're calling for an acceleration of the direct payment to vulnerable households. Second, monetary and fiscal policy needs to be coordinated, and we are seeing some elements of it to make sure that we restore macro stability very quickly. Third, Nigeria needs also to create the conditions, the environment for long-term growth. Right now, the type of flows that are coming into Nigeria are portfolio flows attracted by high return on Naira-denominated securities. Nigeria has a tremendous potential to also bring longer-term type of capital, foreign direct investment, and this requires structural reforms in many, many sectors, including in the hydrocarbon sectors. So it's a comprehensive package of reforms, conjunctural policies, and also confidence boost from the administration, and our recommendation to us are landing pretty well in Nigeria at the current juncture.
So I think we'll leave it at that.
Thank you,
now.
Nancy.
And hoping that we'll get to speak sometime soon. Again, in terms of the policies, let's see between now and the next release what would have happened, and perhaps we would have a better view of what's happening in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
and welcome
Nancy.
to Nigeria. This is actually your first TV interviews.
Thank you.
So welcome.
Thank you very much.
All right, I've been speaking with Dr. Christian Ebeke, who is the IMF resident representative here in Nigeria. We've been talking about the IMF report on the economy of the country. Let's quickly take a break, and when we come back from the break, I'll be chatting with Tajuddin Ibrahim, who is the Director of Research and Strategy at Chapel Hill, Denham, to take on what Dr. Ebeke has said. And of course, the report, like I mentioned earlier, 98 pages. We'll try as much as possible to dissect all that when we return. Do stay. Thank you for watching. In case this is your first time watching us, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, drop your comments as well as like, and most of all, share our content.